Welcome to a new video here on RetroGamesNow. I want to talk about a few things before we dive straight into this video today. This project has been in my unfinished console mods for so long. By the time I upload this video, it will almost be 3 years since I first started to work on it. It has been a huge challenge for me, and I want to tell you why and hopefully share some knowledge for you to learn through my experience on console modding if you ever try to do this kind of work yourself. This is the DCHDMI mod installation on the Dreamcast, and it is a kit that unfortunately at the time of this video is already obsolete. That is what I get for taking too long to complete a mod. It taps into the audio and video signal of the Dreamcast and offers several different output resolutions through an HDMI port which you can connect to your flat screen TV. In a way, you are reviving your Dreamcast to enjoy it in a modern setting while getting a super crisp video image of your favorite games. Now, allow me to explain what you are seeing on your screen right now. When I started this project in 2021, I captured this gameplay footage from my Dreamcast through its stock AV port. But I must clarify that I used an HDMI adapter called the HD Link made by Pound Technology, which is still offered to this day. Connected the console via HDMI through my Live Gamer Mini capture card from AverMedia, and this is how it looks. It looks okay, but the intent is to compare it with footage you will see once the installation is completed. I want to point out that this kit is obsolete, like I mentioned in the beginning. It was originally offered by Black Dog Technologies from 2018 to around 2020, 2021. The creators of this kit retired it and then released a newer version that was called DC Digital, which offered a bit more features like scaling up to 1440p, as the DCHDMI only offered up to 1080p, among other new features. Around 2020, Black Dog Technologies and Woozle, the creator of the Game Boy Advance consolizer, came together and founded the video hardware company called Pixel FX, through which they offered the N64 Digital as their first product. Sometime later, Pixel FX came up with a universal kit that can be installed on multiple consoles, the Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and the Dreamcast, and it's called the RetroGem. Although this kit is no longer sold by its original creators, you can still find it through online stores like AliExpress, so this video isn't completely useless as someone out there might still be trying to install it. But it was a mod that I had to complete and make a video about for my own personal satisfaction, as it was incredibly difficult to complete. I will walk you through all the steps I took, and at the end, we'll enjoy crisp 1080p footage of some of my favorite Dreamcast games. Thank you for watching and subscribing if you haven't already. Alright, so the kit includes the main PCB, and that is the drill block guide. So you can see there, that is the Wi-Fi antenna. It includes the flex cable. This we need to microsolder to the PCB, and that is a connector to the board. We have two M2 8mm screws and two M2 nuts, and a self-adhesive backer for the board. We'll start off by removing the modem module, and then we have access to the 4 bottom screws that we need to remove. This way we remove the main cover. Now we get to see the insides of the Dreamcast. Once we have access to it, I'm discharging here the capacitors so that I don't get zapped. We unhook the power supply and remove the screws and pull it up from the connectors. Then we set it aside along with the insulating plastic that comes with it. From here we remove 3 screws of the disk drive, or the GD-ROM. We set them aside and remove the GD-ROM carefully from the connector and set it aside. Now we will focus on the port interface board. We remove 4 screws from this board. And disconnect the fan and the main board connector. And we set it aside. Here we have 8 screws we need to remove. to take the metal shield off. I don't have the best system here of keeping the screws separate, but it's what I had. You can use whatever method you like so that you don't lose any screws. Then with the aid of these tweezers, I'm levering the metal shield up so that I can remove it. And as you can see here, the thermal interface material stuck to the shield and pulled away from the GPU. The CPU right there still has the thermal material on it. So now we put the main circuit board aside. Right here, I'm trying to remove the lower metal shield panel because we need to modify it. So using a Sharpie, I've made a mark where I need to make these cuts. And with a pair of flush cutters, I cut away. And using a pair of needle nose pliers, I straighten the metal out and then bend it so that I can break the metal away. Then I repeat the same process on the other side, flattening it first completely, and then I try to use my flush cutters to cut the excess, but I had a hard time, so I cut away a little bit and then using the needle nose pliers bend it to remove it completely. I mean, this isn't the best way to make these cuts. They don't look so good at the end, but it's the tools that I had. You can use better tools to make these cuts, definitely. So that I'll leave it up to you. All right, so now we put it back into the lower enclosure and see how it sits now that it's been modified. This area right here is where the DCHDMI board will live. And right here is where I need to drill to make the hole for the HDMI port. You grab your drill block guide, put it on the grill, and you're going to drill the 3 bottom holes. And we're using 3 and 32 inch drill bits for this. I am checking that the size is correct and fits correctly, so it does. And I'm using this drill that I have. I know it's pretty big for the job, but it worked out fine. Now you're gonna see I realized I placed the drill block guide in the wrong place. And what I mean by that is once I drilled the 3 holes, I'm going to place the HDMI board and sort of eyeball it on the lower shield, see where it's going to live. And that is when I realized that the port was sitting more to the right side of the grill, and that's when I realized. So I made markings of where the port is, and I noticed that I had 1 extra hole, so I replaced the drill block guide 1 space over to the right and made the 3rd hole. So once that's ready, we flip the drill block guide to where it has the 2 holes right over the 3 holes that I first drilled. Then again, I eyeballed the HDMI port and it peeks through right there. You can see it. Unfortunately, that extra hole is going to have to live there. Now using a needle file set, I used the round one to create the opening and then I squared it. Next, we place the board and drill the holes needed to secure the board into place with the screws and the nuts. Now before we do that, we need to apply the self-adhesive backer on the DCHDMI board, and that's what I'm going to be doing here. I'm lining it up and then seeing where I'm going to install it on top of the shield. We're going to peel the backing on the adhesive, place it on the board, and then we will remove the backing once again to reveal the adhesive side and place it on the board. I had to go back in and file the square hole a little bit more, as you see there. Once the board is placed on the shield, I'm ready to start drilling. This time the size is different for these drill bits. It's 5 64 inch, and I'm making sure they're the right size, and they are. Keep in mind you're going to drill through the FCC label in the back. I was okay with that, so I started to drill the holes needed. And then we will grab our screw and nut and inserting the screw from the bottom so that the nut is inside of the console. Just like that. And with the help of the needle nose pliers, I tighten it up. Now we move to the second hole that I need to drill, and this is where the other screw and nut is going to be placed to finally secure the DCHDMI board to the lower shield of the console. Just like that, and it's ready. One last step is to install the antenna. We hook it up here. Then I removed the backing of the adhesive and routed the wire and set it down. This part has been completed. We are now going to work on the top metal shield, and with a Sharpie I'm placing a mark where I need to cut the metal and then remove it from here. Once I made the cut, I used my needle nose plier to grab onto this piece and bend it to remove it. This was easier this time. And now we're done with the easy part. Hard part is next. Soldering the flex cable. I tried out something new that I learned from Voltar's channel, and basically this technique consists of removing the oxidation from the old solder that is already on the board. So I placed flux, and using my soldering iron with the J-tip at temperature, I came in with a little bit of solder, and using a sweeping motion I made contact with all of the legs of this IC chip. And if you notice, the solder looks shinier, looks a lot more silver in comparison to the rest of the legs of the IC chip. This technique helped me a lot. Thanks, Voltar. Now, before we get to the hard stuff, we need to remove these two resistors, R610 and R609, as you can see here. The way to remove these is by placing your soldering iron with the J-tip equipped parallel to the resistors and sweep them off the board. Now I'm coming in here with no clean flux, and I'm going to line up the flat flex cable. By the way, this is the audio IC chip. That's where you start. Now you need to line it up with the third leg of the chip from left to right. And I'm going to start tacking it down on the opposite ends. Now, a big tip here is to be patient. Be very, very patient. Now, when I did the pre-work on this section, I added fresh solder, so the pads that are below the flat flex cable have fresh solder. So that's why this technique helped, because as you are putting your J-tip down, that solder is supposed to flow from the bottom up. As you can see here, the right side is now tacked down, and I'm going to do the same on the left side. So this part is the hard part. You have to be really patient. Now I came in with more flux. I was still not fully tacked down on the left side. So I kept pushing down the soldering iron, and until you can see that silver come through is when you know that it's flowing through and it's tacking down. Now you don't need a lot of pressure, so you're touching down, but it's not a lot of pressure. Keep that in mind. For some reason here I decided to use a different type of flux. This is more of a paste. Then I applied a small bead of solder to my tip, and I started applying it on the legs of the IC chip. But if you notice, at some point the J-tip gets stuck. So for a moment there I got really nervous, but I took a deep breath. You see it got stuck again a little bit there. And then look at this. I came in with the no clean flux thinking that, well, maybe this is going to help or it's going to be better. But as a matter of fact, the solder didn't want to melt good enough. So if you notice, it took me longer to get that solder flowing correctly. So this was getting a little bit on my nerves because the J-tip was getting stuck on the pins, and I was like, well, what's going on? So I kept my patience and I started to do this combing motion of up and down, and I didn't lose patience and I kept doing it, as you can see here, and the solder started to flow better, a lot better. So I started to feel more confident on how the joints were coming out. So see here, I'm gently combing through and making sure there are no bridges, and there's a healthy amount of solder on each pad, and that's pretty much it. But this was nerve-wracking and very hard to do. So I recommend tons of patience and self-control. That's definitely one of the lessons I've learned here. And I got rid of that bridge there, and that was it. So now we are moving over to the video encoder chip, and we line up the pins with the legs, the pins of the flat flex cable with the pads. And also I did the same here. I did the pre-work of applying flux, applying new solder, reflowing it so that it's fresh, and it's a lot easier to create the new joints. So exactly the same thing. I came in with no clean flux and started to tack it down. This time I think I already had, I started off with a bead of solder. So I figured, let me just do that from the get-go. And as you can see here, I did a little bit of drag soldering to try and mitigate the soldering iron from getting stuck, but it would kind of get stuck still. But I kept my cool, kept my patience. Then I started to do that dragging motion from top to bottom, and I made sure that all the pads again had a healthy amount of solder on each one of them. And if you see bridges, just don't worry about it. Just redistribute the solder to other points and it's going to be good. Now you do have to clean off your tip from time to time. Also, especially with no clean flux, it starts to evaporate pretty fast, so you need to reapply flux if you're using no clean flux. But as you can tell right there, the solder started to get cold again, and it didn't want to flow very well. But like I said, I kept my patience, cleaned off the tip of any excess solder, came back in and did more of the combing motion. If you notice there, the right side of the flat flex wasn't fully making contact. So what I did is I grabbed a toothpick to press down on the flex cable, and then I started to drag the solder from the legs to the pads. So that, see, and then I came back to that one and filled a little bit more of the solder because it wasn't completely homogeneous. And then I had that little bridge on the left side. Every time you see the iron off camera is because I'm cleaning it. So again, keeping your patience, everything is fine. You don't need to freak out. And then I came in with a little bit more of using the toothpick. Yeah, that middle one right there wasn't fully tacking down. So what I did is I turned the J-tip, and with the point, I applied pressure so that I was focusing the heat only in that area. So I did the same with the other pins, just one by one, just making sure it's completely soldered together. There's a healthy joint there. Now we're moving to the other side of the video encoder, and this was the easier one. Again, with no clean flux. This time I didn't use the paste flux here. So same strategy. I came in and started to tack it down until you can see that little silver come through, which is the new solder that is creeping up from the bottom up to the pins. More flux, always more flux. And now I came in with a bead of solder and started to drag it. But you can tell right there, it would get stuck. So again, if that happens to you, don't freak out. Just be patient, and the solder eventually will start to flow. And also, you don't want to pull too hard if your soldering iron gets stuck, because if you pull too hard, you might damage something, and that's going to be worse. So just trust the heat, trust the flow of the metal. It'll eventually start flowing, as you can see there. Once it reaches that temperature, it starts flowing a lot easier. So there, I got rid of that bridge, and then I came back to make sure the joints were well made. Again, with the combing motion and making sure each pin has a healthy amount of solder. And this is the little technique I came up with on the spot, which is using the tip, the very tip of the soldering iron to touch the pads. And then I decided to clean it up and see how well it looks. I applied some 99% isopropyl alcohol and rubbed it with a toothbrush just to look at the joints, and they look beautiful. Look at that. Incredible. Now the rest of the job is so much easier. Now that you're a little bit more relaxed, you can take a deep breath and solder these other points of the flex cable. Melting a bead on my J-tip and soldering this pad to the flex cable, making sure it was a full connection and it had a uniform shape, just like that. Next, we will place a bead of solder on my J-tip and solder this ceramic chip capacitor onto the flex cable. I added a little bit more of solder, cleaned the tip before that, and made sure there was a healthy bridge of solder there. Then I pressed down on this connection there to make it uniform. I applied some no clean flux on R1 and R2. This is where our resistors originally were, the ones we swept off the board. And then with a toothpick, I pressed down on the flex cable to make sure it was flush with the board, and touched it with the J-tip. Same on the other side. This time, however, I already had a little bit of solder on the tip, and I came back to the other one, and I just kept pressing down with the toothpick to make sure that it was fully connected. I was attempting to have the same amount of solder on each point. That's why I kept going back and forth, but that seemed to be enough. Now we have to connect this leg here of the flex cable to this electrolytic capacitor. Applying some no clean flux and coming in with the J-tip, touching it a little bit just to get it tacked down. And then I rearranged the light of my microscope to point at this exact area where I'm going to solder to see better. Then I pressed down with my J-tip on the solder until I got it fully connected. Now all we have left over on this part is to solder this resistor package right here, which was very simple as well. Applying some flux with a bead of solder on the J-tip and then making the bridge right there. Very easy. Pressing down with a toothpick just to make sure it's fully connected, and that was it. Then I applied some alcohol, 99%, and brushed it down with my toothbrush and reviewed my work. Turning the board around, and we're going to work on these two resistors, R601 and R602. Applying a bead of solder on each one, and we're going to connect some wires here. So I need to have a healthy amount of solder so that the wire can attach to it. So there we have a nice little bead. Didn't want to make full contact, so I added more flux so that both resistors had the same amount of flux and I wouldn't have trouble soldering these wires. I added a little bit of paste flux on each one. I used different colors for each wire just so that I know which one is which, but I came in with this yellow one for R601. As you can see, the extra amount of solder on the resistor is wetting the multi-stranded wire, so that helps a lot. Looks like I added more solder because it wasn't enough, but that will ensure that the multi-stranded wire makes a full connection, as you can see here. Then I moved on to the other resistor. For this one, I used a red wire. I realized I needed to add more solder, so I did the same, and I had no issues getting it the first time. So those wires are ready. Now I need to get another wire soldered to this test point right here. I believe it's IC206, and adding some solder so that that can attach to this green multi-stranded wire. It wasn't connecting very well, so I added more solder, and then I realized I needed a lot more flux, so I cleaned my tip and added more solder to have it fully connected, as you'll see right now. And that's it. I've completed all the work on the Dreamcast motherboard. Now I need to connect these wires to the DCHDMI board that I installed in the beginning. All right, so let's take a look at the console inside. So here we have the DCHDMI. I have the test point, which is the blue wire soldered to a pad on the DCHDMI called RST. And the yellow, which is the R601, is soldered to a pad called P1 on the DCHDMI, and the red wire that is soldered to R602 is soldered to P2 on the DCHDMI. The wires, I acknowledge they are a bit long, but that is on purpose so that whenever I need to open up the console, these wires aren't short enough that they are pulled when I raise the motherboard, if I ever need to. So this is the top part. That is the install you saw a few moments ago. And I'm showing here a little bit of an up close, a better focused image of P1, P2, and RST. By the way, RST is reset. That's what that means. So again, the blue wire is from the test point to the reset. The yellow wire is from R601 to P1, and the red wire is from R602 to P2. I noticed in the last revision of this kit, they included a flex cable that had these 3 paths. Instead of soldering wires, you've simply soldered a narrower flex cable for these 3 points. So that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, I don't have that for this setup, so I'm gonna have to keep it this way. And that is it. It's time to check out the final result. So here we have the Dreamcast connected via HDMI from my console into the Live Gamer Mini capture card. I'm going to go into the file menu so that way I can get into the DCHDMI menu so we can see the options. We're going to hit left, right, start, X, and A. So there it is. That's the menu of the DC Digital. And let's go over a little bit the options we have here. So output resolution, we have 4 options. We have VGA, 480p, 960p, and 1080p. Like I said, this version of the kit only goes up to 1080p. The other version that got revised later on goes up to 1440p. Even better, the RetroGem Universal board has these options as well. So I don't think my capture card has the option for 960p, because if I select this one, it won't display it. I'm going to revert back. It will display 480p, however. So let's try 480p, I think. Yeah, there it is. At least with 480p, you see that the screen is a little bit bigger. It covers most of the area. Let me revert back to 1080p. And then we have VGA, which is a resolution native to the Dreamcast, which compared to the consoles of that era, meaning PS2, Xbox, GameCube, I don't think any of them had VGA, but the Dreamcast did. So this was one of the things it made this console ahead of its time for sure. So we can go into VGA. That's the one that fills the screen. All right, so it reverted back to 1080p. So yeah, let's see. I'm gonna show you some footage in VGA because I want to check it out myself. With R, we keep this configuration. If you notice, it stretches the image a little bit. So with L, I'm gonna go back. We have some advanced video settings. These, I'm gonna be honest, I don't fully understand them yet. I'm not gonna waste time talking about them. Scan lines, we can add scan lines, but if we do, we lose a lot of brightness. So I don't like to add them. Video mode settings, for those of you who don't know, not all of the Dreamcast library has VGA support. There are games you can force them to go into VGA or even switch trick to VGA. Pretty much I've found that have worked for me are either force VGA and switch trick VGA. Firmware, this kit comes with a Wi-Fi antenna like I mentioned earlier. You can connect it up to your internet and it can get updated over the air, which is freaking cool. You can hook up your Dreamcast to the Wi-Fi. Although it's just for this, but it's still so cool. I'm on the latest firmware. Honestly, this firmware hasn't been updated since like 2021. As you can see here, my firmware is up to date. I'm going to view the changelog. So the last version was 4.9. Async Wi-Fi setup solves issue 17. If we really think about it, they don't have a need to update this. Or maybe they do, but what I'm saying is this board really is obsolete. They have a better one, which is the RetroGem. Maybe we will see the updates on this one at a very slow pace with time. I got mine set up. So last is the test info. This is the big one. When you finish the installation, you are supposed to go into this part of the menu. This is a straight indication of how well a job you did installing it. So under every number, 01, 02, so on, you should see a heart, meaning that there is full connections and everything is right. The first time that I booted up the console and I saw this, the relief I got was insane. It felt so good. The dopamine I got looking at that, knowing that I had pulled off this myself, nothing compares to that. Like I said, if you're patient enough, if you get all the right tools to do it, you can pull it off and it's super rewarding. I highly recommend it. Okay, so enough of that. All right, so pretty much that's it. All right, I need to be clear about something before we head out. In this console, I have a GDEMU already installed and set up. Maybe in a future video we can talk only about that, but for this video I thought all that I have covered is way too much to then talk about the GDEMU. So right now, exiting out of this menu, it's going to boot up again and it's going to send me into the GDEMU. So what you're going to see is the open menu software for the GDEMU. I can do a separate video just talking about this because the way I got it set up and everything is a whole process in itself. But yes, this should be something you should aim for if you are modding your Dreamcast. You might as well do the GDEMU, taking off the GD-ROM drive and installing a GDEMU so that you can put hundreds of games in a micro SD card and play them off of there. You might as well. So let's check Sonic Adventure and we'll compare it to the footage that I showed initially. And we aren't getting a signal, which means that some setting it didn't like. I'm going to shut it off, turn it back on. All right, I'm going to change the settings to what I know has worked for me. So from here I press Y and it brings me back here. So I'm going to go into File. I'm going to do left, right, X, A, and Start. Resolution, I'm going to change it to 1080p. All right, I'm going to keep that, and then video mode settings, I'm going to go into Force VGA and it's going to reset the console. So this is actual 1080p right here. We should be able to run a game now. All right, let's go to Sonic Adventure. So there it is. So we started Sonic Adventure. Let's check it out. I will say though, for example, on my flat screen TV, I am able to upscale to 960p. So I'm able to get, you know, the image fills completely the screen. So, but unfortunately here, my capture card doesn't support that resolution, so I can't get it to fill the screen with this high quality of a picture. So as you can see, it looks pretty cool. Pretty amazing. Let's see, let's check out a little bit of gameplay here.
Select a memory card. Select a file. Select a character.
Let's get him!
So as you can see, the game looks phenomenal. Looks freaking great. So, yep, there you have it. We hit the 4 face buttons and start, and it resets the game. We do that again, and it resets the GDEMU, and it brings me back to the selection of games. So let's check out Cannon Spike. This is a game that looks incredible, and it plays super fun to play. I've never finished it, but I've played it for a few minutes from time to time, and it's a lot of fun. Let's jump straight into a game. All right, play with Charlie. So as you can see, the game is pretty fun. This is one of those games on the Dreamcast that is ridiculously expensive. So it's completely valid to play it this way, because we're not about to drop $300 for a copy of this game. It's one of those games that nobody wanted back then, and then all of a sudden it became rare. Man, this gorilla always freaks me out. I mean, a gorilla spitting cockroaches, that should not be that should not be fun at all. So Cannon Spike is a super fun game. I'm gonna reset. I'm gonna get out of this one. Let's showcase a couple more, just so that you can see how well this mod works and how much life it gives back to the Dreamcast. Oh, I know which one. One of my favorite fighting games ever is on this beautiful console right here. Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Man, this game plays like a dream on the Dreamcast. Yeah, this is one of my favorite fighting games of all time, and being able to play it in this quality, woo, it's such a joy, such a fun experience. So let's let the intro roll here. I love it. Ready? Absolutely fantastic. Look at those colors, how they shine. Let's get into a really quick game, just so that you can see the action. I always go for Wolverine, Spider-Man, and Ryu. Now, I do have to add that I'm using 2 monitors here. And if you look at the feed from OBS, there is a little bit of delay, but that is, you know, expected from the capture card. So for fighting games, you know, I'd recommend not to look at OBS when you're playing, but rather get yourself a separate monitor where you are feeding the straight video from the console. That way there's no lag, because otherwise it's a little bit difficult to play. But look at how beautiful the game looks, man. It's just amazing. Just freaking amazing. Like I said, you can mess around with some of the other settings that this DCHDMI has. Maybe in a future video I can go more in depth on that aspect of it. But for now, I'm mostly focused on showing you how good it looks. Man, this video is going on an hour already. Would you believe I had like 4 hours of footage that I had to edit down into like a 30-minute video, and still I feel like nobody's gonna get to the end over here. If you made it to this part of the video, man, I salute you. Thank you so much for watching all the way up to here. Seriously, I'm super grateful for you to have someone check out my videos this long. I mean, I hope it's been informative. I hope it's been useful. Maybe you get this DCHDMI mod. Like I said, they're still available. I guess to a point they're still supported by Pixel FX. This one in particular is updatable through Wi-Fi. I'm assuming if they come up with more updates for this one in particular, you can update it. But like I said, 4.9 is the latest firmware, and that's almost 3 years old. Who knows? Maybe they just do random firmware updates from time to time. But you can go grab this mod from AliExpress and come back to my video and use it to maybe get some learning points and try it out for yourself. Yeah, it's challenging for sure, but it's like I said, it's very rewarding. I mean, to be able to enjoy your old console from 25 years ago this well, there's just something about it, man. You just extend the life of this console, and it's incredible. The Dreamcast definitely died too soon. All right, so I'm going to stop here and do some final thoughts. We'll finish the video off here. So some final thoughts on this mod. I want to say that it was a project that took me 3 years to complete. There was a point that I thought that I was never going to complete it, but I've got to give props to Voltar, because there was a live stream by him like 2 or 3 months ago where he installed one of these kits. I watched it completely when he got to the point where he was soldering the flex cable to the audio IC and the video deck. He talked about these little tips to make it easier on yourself to do this installation, and so that really inspired me. I watched him do it. I'm like, you know what? I feel like I can pull it off this time, because when I first tried it, I was still not as experienced with micro soldering, and I honestly didn't have the right tools to verify my work. This time I have a microscope where I got all the footage you saw. And when I tried this 3 years ago, I did not have a microscope. So I was using a loop, magnifying glasses to look. The lighting sucked. I didn't have the technique. Actually, I botched 2 flex cables. So back then, 3 years ago, I installed 1 flex cable and I didn't get a picture. In fact, if you want to see that video, again, if you get all the way to this part of the video, thank you very much. And if you want to see that, maybe I can upload the failures of this mod in a separate video so that you can see what happens if it goes south. So I installed the flex cable once. I didn't get a picture. That's when I started to freak out. So I decided to remove the flex cable, but I didn't have the right tool, which in this case, that would be a hot air station, because that way with hot air at a high temperature, you can melt all the solder and slowly pull the flex cable away without tugging on it and damaging anything on the board. What I was doing is I was using my soldering iron, and I was using soldering wick to remove the solder, and as I was pushing with soldering iron and I was pulling away with the braid, I created this whole set of very wrong conditions, and I ended up damaging that board. Later on, I bought 2 flex cables. I installed one of them, and same thing happened. By that time, I realized that I had already lifted a few pads on the video deck. I had damaged the traces on the board. Man, that made me go into hiding for 3 years almost. So what I ended up doing is I went to eBay and got a Dreamcast for parts, and I salvaged the motherboard of that Dreamcast, and that's the one that you saw in the video that I successfully soldered this flex cable to. The motherboard you saw in the first part of the video, that is the motherboard that I actually ruined. So this final product, the actual Dreamcast that I set up, it has parts from multiple consoles because that's the only way I could pull it off. Like I said, I ruined my original motherboard, which is lying somewhere over there. And then just a couple of months ago, I decided to give it a try again. I bought that Dreamcast for parts, same model, same everything. I salvaged the motherboard from that console from eBay and then finished the job on that one, and then installed it on my original shell. By the way, that shell was also, I did a little treatment on the shell to get it white again, and you can actually see that video here on my channel when I did that. It was, I think, 2 summers ago. I'll stop rambling. That's enough for this video. It's so long. I don't know if anybody's gonna actually get to the end, but if you do, thank you. I appreciate you. Leave me a comment if you do. This was a super challenging mod. The editing for this video was insane. It took me a full week to complete. So yeah, let me know what you think. I want to start streaming some Dreamcast games with this beauty now hooked up to HDMI. I can do a high quality stream with it at this point. I don't think this is going to be my last sort of HDMI mod on a console. I really want to get my hands on the RetroGem from Pixel FX, and I want to give that a try because that has its own challenges as well. I have PS2, PS1. I think I would go for the PS2 and install it there. That way it's pretty much 2 birds with 1 stone. You get to play games of the PS1 and the PS2 on that console with HDMI output. I want to shoot for that one, and I also have an N64. That would be another great one too to to install this mod on. Well, thanks again. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, leave a like, comment, give me some feedback. If there's something you saw that you didn't think was correct, just let me know. Put it in the comments with respect, obviously, of course. And that's it. I'll see you guys on the next video.